we are talking about chronic illness with Angelica. And as I understand it, Angelica, you are seeking a diagnosis of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome.
Yes, I'm seeking diagnosis for Ehlers-Danlos as well as POTS, and I have already been diagnosed with autism. Not a lot of people, some people may not consider autism a chronic illness, but it is part of the whole mental and physical health spectrum. So.
Most definitely. So, what was your first indication that something wasn't quite right?
Well, as a child, I was flexible, but most children are. My mom may not have ever figured it out until I got older without a notification from my dad, actually. My dad's side of the family saying that we should get tested. So it was more a push from their side of the family telling us that something was wrong on their end, that because we are related to them, we should pursue diagnoses. And then as I grew older, I had stretch marks. I am more prone to sprains than most people. Like, there are people that would fall and get a break from that fall. I would be more likely to get a sprain. But I'm also liable to just get a sprain from walking down the street.
I know how that is. For for people watching who aren't familiar with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and POTS, could you give us a brief explanation of what that is and what that does?
Sure. So Ehlers-Danlos is one of several different connective tissue disorders. And what that does in most cases is it makes the connective tissues, the joints, the ligaments, and the cartilage surrounding your joints be more stretchy, so they don't hold things in place as well. In me, another thing that this does is it makes my muscles do a lot of the work of holding things up. So I am very muscled, especially my neck is really well toned, more toned than an average person's. And POTS is a heart condition that makes your blood, among other things, it makes your blood pressure drop on standing. And typically the way you can see this is because your heart rate also spikes when you stand. Clinical diagnosis, it needs to have a 30 beat per minute change for standing less than 10 minutes for it to be considered POTS. Another thing that POTS does is it tends to have more blood pooling. So if you're standing for a long time, your feet might change colors. Or if you're, what was I going to say? If you're sitting still for a long time, you may not have as good of circulation, so your hands and your feet might get colder.
That's a good explanation. We definitely have to do our research.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. So was it difficult to get doctors to pick up on what was going on, or did they actually guide you to the diagnosis?
With the Ehlers-Danlos, of course, I'm not officially diagnosed yet, but as a child, we got that appointment with the geneticist, and within the first visit, she was like, you definitely have something going on with your connective tissues. I believe it's now Ehlers-Danlos because my sibling has that diagnosis, and it typically runs in families. And then with the POTS, I have, since I was a child, because we were followed by a cardiologist at the time, been diagnosed with orthostatic hypotension, which means that my blood pressure drops when I stand up. So I've got that part of the diagnosis, but I have not been able to get a doctor to listen to me about the POTS side of things. Specifically, I've had two surgeries in the last year, and in between the two, I talked to my doctor about my suspicions of having POTS, and I described my chronic symptoms. And she looked at me and she says, all of these symptoms can be caused by the surgery you just had. So let's wait. So POTS is a little bit more difficult, but um, as far as the surgeries that I've had the anesthesiologist both look at me and say, okay, this is what you think you have. We're going to treat you like you have it. And I've been better for it.
Actually, the single doctor that was most interested in my postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome was an anesthesiologist.
Mm-hmm.
I was preparing for a surgery and I mentioned it to my doctor, and my doctor was like, well, I'll let the anesthesiologist know. We could give you medications to bring your blood pressure up. I'm not worried at all.
Mm-hmm.
So you're supposed to check in with the anesthesiologist normally, like a week or so before the surgeries. And the anesthesiologist was like, I want to see you. I want you to come in. I want to assess you. I want to know everything about what's going on. And it was basically a full interview of like, wow, and how did you figure this out? And what does it do for you? And you've had a lot of surgeries before. What went well during anesthesia? What didn't go? And I'm just like, no one has ever taken an interest in me having POTS the way this anesthesiologist did. And so I'm just like, I'm taking your name. I don't care what kind of surgery I'm having. You are the person I want as my anesthesiologist.
Sure.
And my mom actually had an anesthesiologist that she would demand as well. You know, no matter what it was for. She's like, you're not putting me under until I see Dr. So-and-so. He's the only, I want him to be the last person I see.
Sure.
She also has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and POTS as well. So, yeah, it's hard, especially with POTS, to finally get that interest and get that get the wheels rolling on getting a definitive diagnosis.
Yeah, definitely. It's something that I'm continuing to pursue, but my doctor wants to wait, so I have switched doctors and I am pursuing it.
I know how that is, going on the doctor go round, I call it.
Mm-hmm. So, I don't know. I had a thought. Go ahead.
All right. Before we started, we talked a little bit about insurance. And
Yep.
have you felt that your insurance situation has affected the level of care you receive or how you get your care?
So that's a really interesting question. Growing up and up until 2 years ago, 2.5 now, I was on state insurance because growing up we didn't have a lot of money. I moved out on my own. I was not making a lot of money. I was in school. I couldn't work enough to make enough money to have health insurance. And then 2 years ago, I get a job with Microsoft, and they have employer-sponsored insurance. I would definitely say my quality of care has gone up. Um, I still struggle because with the insurance, my deductible and my co-insurance are so high that I have doctor bills piling on top of each other. Um, but I still feel like the quality of care and the attention that I get from doctors has gone up because I have a named insurance that I'm paying for through my employer. Um, and then something to note about insurance, if you are either uninsured or you're insured with a high deductible, high coinsurance like I am, your hospital and most clinics should have a community care or charity care program where if you meet the income requirements, you'll get part or all of your bill taken off.
Yes,
And your insurance will still think that you have paid that, so it won't count against you either.
yes. My husband and I use our medical financial assistance waiver,
Mm-hmm.
and it has saved us because we're paying just about all we can afford on premiums alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I would hit the deductible every time, and it's insanely high. So it has definitely saved us.
Yeah, it's definitely helpful to know that I don't have to pay this entire stack, just about this much of it.
Yeah.
So
So you mentioned that you were working at Microsoft. Are you still working?
I am. I started when we still had stores open as a product advisor actually. So I was selling computers. That was probably the hardest um, because I was up there with other retail jobs that I've worked. It was probably the hardest for me because I was on my feet 100% of the time unless I was back in the break room. And then I got to move back and I was working in our warehouse. I still had that up and down ladders and walking every day, but because of the way we were set up, I was able to sit down and take breaks more than just the times that I was off the clock. Um, with the pandemic, we moved by the end of March last year into working from home. And by July, they had decided that they were shutting all stores down, which means I have not gone back into the store since March 16th of last year.
Ooh.
Um, and I still have a job. I am still hired with Microsoft. We have transitioned everyone that was working in the stores now has a job at the office.
Okay.
Um, we're still working from home and doing everything that we would do in the office. We're doing it at home. Um, and it's been really great to have that consistency. Um, I've also never worked an office job before, so this should be interesting. Um, if if I stay with Microsoft when I move to Boston. um, so I'm moving. We talked about my skating just before we started. I am moving to Boston to further pursue skating, and I don't know. This is where the Microsoft comes in. I don't know if I'll be able to maintain the office schedule, much less the corporate schedule, with ice time. So it's definitely up in the air, but I hope to be able to continue working for Microsoft.
Yeah, I'm rooting for you because it's really difficult to keep up a good activity level with POTS and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I remember as a child, I actually did speed skating on rollerblades,
Ooh,
uh,
okay.
and I went from that to completely not being able to do much at all.
Mm-hmm.
So keeping it up and being very careful about not getting deconditioned is
Yes.
a big concern that we have.
Yeah, not losing my conditioning. Um, it's hard with surgeries. The two that I've had this year, I had to take 6 weeks off the ice both times. Um, and getting back up to the level that I was at before is difficult. Um, so, yeah, definitely not losing that conditioning. Um, with the start of the pandemic last year, too, they closed all rinks. Were closed for like 4 months. Um, and I bought myself some outdoor blades to put on an old pair of skates, so I was able to some degree to continue skating. But it just wasn't the same. So,
Yeah, the best of luck. So what are your hopes of skating? Is there a team that you're wanting to join? Is there Olympic aspirations, perhaps?
so I am hoping to make the 2026 Olympics. Um, Fingers crossed that I don't have any more injuries. Yeah, I that's the hope. However, at 24, almost 25, it is unlikely because of being in the U.S. Unlikely, but not impossible. Just the
That would
U.S.
be
tends
wonderful.
yes, it would be. Um, and I brought up injuries. I've had in the past 4 years, I have now had 4 surgeries. Um, one of them was for an injury. I was working on a jump, so it was skating related. I landed that jump wrong, and the way that I twisted my ankle, I tore 2 ligaments. Um, and the doctor said it was a sprain when I first went to them and was like, my ankle's hurting after this fall I took. They're like, it's just a sprain, you're fine. So I do what I've done all my life, and I believe the doctors, and I continue skating. And then I collapse on that foot, trying to do a move. Um, and I go back to the doctor, and I'm like, it's not just a sprain.
Yeah.
So that one bought me 6 months off the ice.
Oh
Um,
man, that's rough.
yeah, and it wasn't just 6 months off the ice; it was 6 months off that foot. Um, so building back up that muscle tone too to be able to have the equality that I have in my legs and my feet.
Yeah.
So
Wow. Um, yeah, because as you said earlier, with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, we rely on our muscles a lot more than our ligaments to kind of hold ourselves together.
yes, um, yeah, there's definitely a lot of that going on.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, tailoring exercise and physical therapy and and things like that are very very important. But then sometimes with POTS, getting the energy to do all that is also extremely difficult.
Yes, I definitely have days where I just don't feel like doing anything. Um, and some days I can let myself do that. With skating, my dreams and the age that I'm at, there's not a lot of days that I can do that. Like I have my days off and I take those days off and I let myself be low activity those days. But when I'm on the ice, I try and push myself to be the best that I can.
Yeah. I have noticed, and I wonder if you have the same experience. I find myself, if there's one thing that I just have to do, I could be like, okay, no matter what, I am doing this, and I push, and I can, I could function surprisingly well, but then I kind of have to take a week to recover from that.
Yes, definitely. examples I can think of are the various moves that we've taken throughout my life. It's like you have to push and get boxes moved out of the truck and into the house because you have to return the truck at the end of the day. But then, okay, the boxes are in the house. I can now take time off. I don't have to deal with these boxes for a week.
Yeah. In fact, I took a very strong downturn um, after trying to get a job. I felt really bad that my husband was kind of carrying us financially. And I'm thinking, I got to do something. And there was a job um, as a cook. And I'm like, that's something that I could probably do. And when it just seemed to be like the absolute worst thing for me to be doing, the extreme heat of going to the ovens and the fryers, the extreme cold of going to the freezers, and going back and forth between those extremes while being on my feet all day. I had about 3 months of that job, and then just my body just literally broke down. And that's when I didn't have a diagnosis of anything except general autonomic dysfunction. They're just like, yeah, you got some tachycardia for no good reason. We don't know why. Take these pills. Oh, you feel better? Success. And that was that.
Mm-hmm.
But that was my first experience with beta blockers, and that was life changing. And after that, I'm just like, yeah, I could get a job. And no. It definitely helped, but that getting that job was like one of the worst things for my long term health, even because it broke me down, and I'm still not at the level that I was before I took that job because I broke down, got so seriously ill, spent 18 months in bed, and I'm still trying to recondition myself to get to a normal stay at home mom activity level.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, yeah, like I forgot what started me on this this tangent, and I apologize.
It's
But
okay.
but yeah, it's very important to be like kind of I always called it like a window because if
Mm-hmm.
I don't get enough activity, I feel terrible. And if I overdo it, I
Yep.
feel terrible.
Yep.
So, for us, like for a normal person, the window might be here. For us, the window might be like very small and right here. And for some people, like you ice skate, which is incredible. So you could definitely be ahead of our curve. Um,
Yeah. I think too, it's about balance and being able to know how many spoons you have. It's like, do I have enough spoons for this task? Am I going to be able to conserve them to do this thing at the end of the day? Which, for anyone who doesn't know what spoons are, it's talked about a lot in the chronic illness community. It's a measure of how much energy a thing takes. If you're into Dungeons and Dragons, you can think of it like spell slots. Everything takes a certain number of spoons or a certain amount of spell slots. And if you don't have enough spoons to do that thing, then you're not going to be able to do it. Or if it's something you absolutely have to do, then you'll do it, but you will be working from a deficit. And that deficit is not always replaced by a single good night's sleep. Um, so it's something that we have to consider ourselves before we commit to doing something, or even while we're committing to doing something. Um,
Yeah, definitely. Spoon theory is something I taught my husband a lot about, and
Sure.
um, and yeah, like I, there's days where I just like, sorry, honey, I don't have any spoons today. Yeah, the house is a mess. The kids are running around. Like, sorry, don't have the spoons.
And why does doing an activity with kids seem to take more spoons than doing an activity that should be the same amount of spoons alone?
I I know. Um, I mean, I feel that too, and like I could be like playing a game on my own just because I don't have energy to do much else, and then my son comes along like, "Hey, mom, can you play this game with me?" It suddenly like costs a spoon instead of recharging. But um, my kids are always the first thing I spend my spoons are.
Mhm.
And then, you know, my husband is the second because he takes such good care of me. And then, of course,
Yeah.
like the house and the chores, that could wait until I have more spoons.
Yeah.
um, so this is absolutely great. We've talked about ice skating and working towards your diagnosis. Is there anything else that you would like to share with us?
Um, I don't think so.
All right. What I often ask is if you had the opportunity to be in front of a room full of doctors and teach them something and tell them something, what would you like to say to them?
Honestly, the biggest thing for me, and it kind of encompasses a lot of things, would be take us seriously. Um, I can't tell you how many different times different doctors have not taken me seriously until I had my mom in the room or until I came back with research. I can be like, I think I have this, or I can be like, I know I have this, and I think it's causing symptoms, but until I have something to back me up, they haven't taken me seriously. So I think that would be the biggest thing. It's just listen to us and take us seriously. We know our bodies because we live in them every day.
Absolutely. I'll take my husband with me to doctors, especially new doctors, whenever I can. And I've kind of had to train him because even though, I mean, he's very supportive, but he's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like a, you are strong and independent, you've got this kind of supportive. And I kind of seek out the, no, please help me kind of
Mm-hmm.
support. And over the years, he's learned that it makes a huge difference if a doctor isn't caring for me the way I need, isn't listening to me, isn't taking me seriously, and I say, hey, this is not okay. I'm very easily dismissed. But if my the camera flashed a little bit, but you're back.
Okay.
But if my husband would be behind me and say the exact same thing, hey, this is not okay. You need to treat my wife better. That carries a lot more weight and that carries a lot more seriousness. Like my
Mm-hmm.
mom was the best at advocating for me.
Mm-hmm.
So much that it made it a little harder when I actually kind of had to advocate for myself.
Yeah.
But she has butt heads with a lot of doctors because she's had to fight for herself. And she's like, oh no, you are not doing this to my daughter too.
Mhm.
And so, I would have to, you know, my mom nagged my husband a lot, and I had to like, no, look at my mom. This is what you've got to do. And
Yeah.
he's such a nice guy, and he's not confrontational at all. So like, it's not exactly comfortable for him to confront a doctor who's mistreating me and say, no, this is not okay. He's not comfortable with that confrontation. So I'm just like, do you want your wife to get better?
Right.
Because we tend to really have to fight for our care.
Mhm.
And so thank you so, so much, Angelica, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, anytime. And I wish you the best. And definitely let me know how skating tryouts go. And I
For sure.
I would love to hear how you're doing there. All right.
Thank
And
you.
this will be up on YouTube tomorrow. And next week, Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern, will be our next interview. So we're going to say goodbye to Twitch and goodbye to YouTube